Welcome to the Mentoring Triangle, and today I'm joined by my two senior leadership colleagues at London County Mentoring, Steve Turner and Julian Powell. And today we're going to be talking about Manchester United as part 2 of our series, Exploring Leadership and Performance. So perhaps, Steve, as our Manchester United fan, we should come straight to you off the back of the disastrous result by losing at home 3-0 to Liverpool at the weekend. I really want to look at the effect that such big results have on a football club, but also the increased pressure it's putting on David Moyes as the manager.
Well, the word doom comes to mind. It just feels kind of inexorable that the club's in decline. And of course I want to stop the decline. So I think as a fan, every fan would, how can we stop the rot? And that leads, I guess, on to big questions about the security of the manager and their whole style and approach and how other people react. But as a non-fan, what's your diagnosis? I mean, it's so tempting for me to say, change the manager, like everyone else does, in that knee-jerk reaction. But you can look at it more dispassionately. What is that?
Well, I can, but I'm also quite pleased you're struggling because the next Premier League game you had is away to West Ham United, so there's never been a better time for my team to be playing against Manchester United. But I think there have been a couple of things in the last 3 weeks since we did our first piece on Manchester United, which have been quite significant. One of them was that David Moyes did the open letter to shareholders and supporters, just thanking them for the support and as part of the PR, the club really trying to communicate with its supporters and its stakeholders. And the other one was that Sir Alex Ferguson at the Oscars publicly made comment that things would be okay and it's going to take time and the club is right behind David Moyes. So I think that's a very strong statement as well. And the fact that Robin Van Persie has come out and said that he actually wants to stay at the club and wants to sign a new contract. So that helped to quieten some of the noise around a superstar player who was supposedly disaffected. But I think there's some bigger issues that are building because modern life, you're talking about audience in the ground, but also social media in terms of the reach that Manchester United has.
Sure. And
the fact that now things can just go like a bushfire really quickly. And that is very difficult to control in that in the ground on Sunday I was really impressed with how the supporters decided to present themselves as the world's best supporters and really support the team and be behind David Moyes. So I think that's very impressive. But I think the real challenge now is people are going to be asking questions about the quality of the support team that David Moyes has around him. What's the experience base of the coaching staff, albeit long-standing, wonderful history with the club, with people like Phil Neville and Ryan Giggs. But the reality is there isn't the experience that Sir Alex Ferguson had with him, where down the years he's had Walter Smith working with him and he's had Rene Meulenstein working with him, he's had Carlos Queiroz working with him. And I think one of the great things that really experienced leaders do is they surround themselves with people who are far more experienced than themselves. And that takes a lot of courage to do that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. I think we said last time, where are the signs of leadership elsewhere in that team? We don't hear those voices. And I'd like to be seeing more. I'd like to be seeing Phil Neville on the TV talking about the confidence of that top team. And of course you grow your confidence as you talk about it and people see it and the team see it. The other side of it would be around the vulnerability, which again I think I talked about last time, and whether right now it would be reassuring for people to hear from David Moyes how difficult he's finding it. It's implied in the letter, but let's hear that story so people can say, okay, they're not disguising things, they're not dressing things up as being great when they aren't. It really is actually a crisis, and he recognises it, and let's all kind of pull together. Would that vulnerability be inspiring? Would it evoke the kind of followership that leadership should evoke? And I don't know, if you heard him do that, would you think...
Well, that's fascinating, isn't it? Because the culture of football is very much hero or villain. And it might be perceived that that's a man who's admitting he's drowning.
Yeah.
But I think, there's the opportunity to really be honest. And I think that anyone who is prepared to acknowledge the struggle that they're under is someone who's dealing with the reality. And that's why I think sport is such a fantastic mirror for other parts of life, is that it moves so fast that if you aren't dealing in the reality in the here and now, then results just conspire against you very, very quickly, and things spiral out of control.
Yeah.
So I would love to see him actually come out and say that.
Well, I think another reason why that could be helpful, both from David Moyes himself and from Phil Neville and others, is to avoid exaggerated thinking. One of the things we do working with young sports people is help them ride the ups and downs without thinking it's disaster or it's unbelievable triumph, because you lose your even balance and key. And what I think we're seeing here is a lot of catastrophizing, to use that young word. So as a fan, doom, inexorable decline. Wayne Rooney saying, that was the worst day of my football life. The columnist saying they're not going to win a title for the next 10 years at least. Those are all exaggerated thoughts, exaggerated by a sense of pain.
I'm relieved to hear you say
What
that.
has happened? They've just lost a few games. Okay, it might feel bad, but they've lost a few games. There must be a general plan about what they're trying to do. Talk about it very clearly and very strongly. That's what I think is really called for. Avoid this catastrophizing, amplified thinking because of the social media. Try and calm it down.
The kind of conversations that you might have with someone who you're working with, coaching or mentoring, might be about how you use adversity to grow and develop and so on. And again, I'd love to hear Moyes talking about that, to say, okay, it's not a catastrophe, but we've lost some of our lustre, some of our right, our entitlement to glory. How will this make us a stronger club, a stronger team again, and have that confidence? Might be bad till the end of the season, but in 3 seasons' time or 2 seasons' time, given the time, we'll be back to where we should be. That would be good to hear.
Look at the Australian cricket team. Lost 3-0 last year. They won 5-0 6 months later. They weren't catastrophising. They were planning very sensibly what they were going to do to win in 3 months' time.
With a change of leadership, of course.
It was with a change.
Darren Lehman coming in. So I suppose if you were alongside Moyes, working in the way you do, what would be the sort of conversation you'd start with him to enable him to ride this storm and come out successfully?
Well, I think the first thing that has to happen for any leader is you've got to get in touch with yourself. How are you feeling? And I don't think that's an easy thing to do when you are constantly out there fighting fires. So I think acknowledging there's a need for public talk in order to create a sense of calm and for your presence to be felt. But I think the kind of work you do in private, acknowledging your vulnerability, really assessing the strengths and weaknesses of the people around you in the system that you've got, I think is everything. But I think the biggest challenge is not to get drawn into the comparisons that everyone else is making. And he's been quite fortunate in the last few weeks that Manchester City have been struggling. They lost the semi-final of the Cup. They went out in the European Cup to Barcelona. But of course the defeat to Liverpool was very bad news. And they've got another fixture against Manchester City coming up. But I think the key thing for any leader is to be able to focus on what they do well and what they need to do, and trying to enhance what's going on within your own system. And I don't think you can do that if your eyes are constantly flitting to what's happening away from you.
The thing that I think is most missing, which I think Ferguson was able to do, he conveyed a sense of belief. His self-belief was very strong. And I think that's missing. So if you look at some of the models of high-performing teams, for example, self-belief is quite high up there in the list, which means you might say this is a really difficult phase for us right now. But look at our strengths, look at our history, look at the skills here. We've got the resources to ride this and come good again. Not in a sort of deluding sense, but this team's largely the team that won the Premiership the season before. So there's not a complete dearth of talent and resource there. But I think it's that I'd love to be talking with him about, how to rediscover a personal self-belief, which all his body language tells me he's lost, as well as the self-belief of a club.
Well, I think the level of scrutiny is obviously greater than David Moyes has ever experienced before, and arguably any other manager would experience. So that's why I think the need to step away from that and have your own way of re-energising, whether it's with people or whether it be time alone, what kind of reading he does, what kind of distractions he has away from his working life. Because I think one of the challenges is one gets so caught up in the professional working self that the energy gets more and more depleted. So it becomes harder to make good decisions, let alone under pressure.
Sure.
And over time you just, almost like a candle that just sort of gets burnt out. So I think it's going to be a fascinating story just in the next fortnight to see what happens. But ultimately, I don't think this is going to be particularly about player development. This is going to be about money. Because fundamentally, if they don't make the Champions League and they miss out on 40-50 million quid as a consequence of not being in that, they're going to have to rebuild the team. He's already spent 50-60 million pounds on players who haven't quite worked so far. So the board's decision in terms of the leadership at the highest level of the organisation is, do you decide to allow this individual to invest another 100 million to get you where you want to be, if you've not been impressed with the way the first 60 million's been spent? Or do you say, the first cut's the cheapest, and you accept that it's not quite worked out and decide to put that bigger investment behind a new person? But if they are thinking about a new person or changing the manager, I think the hardest thing is always, it's all well and good saying it's not working, but can you actually replace them with someone who's much better, and who's to say that the next person isn't going to experience the same struggles? And that was the Manchester United story after Sir Matt Busby finished. Went through a succession of managers over 20 odd years until Sir Alex Ferguson came along. So,
well, although actually in that phase was a really good period following relegation. So the other way of looking at this is to say, not to amplify the crisis, but there are leaders who do that. They certainly say you should never miss the opportunity of a good crisis, to take stock and think again, is there a complacency there? I just don't know about the club. Through the Ferguson years, relegation and Tommy Docherty, some would argue, was the best thing that ever happened to Man United. I'm not suggesting that as a solution now, it would just be too painful. But maybe there's something to that, to look at it over a slightly longer period of time, if the money people allow that length of time to take place.
Well, I think that's the big difference in modern sport. I don't think the money people would allow that, which is why you get this constant churn of people in leadership positions. But I'd just like to zone in on that comment that you made about crisis, because I think that's a really significant point. Actually not give up the opportunity to benefit from a crisis.
Well, and of course it's how you do it, and I guess the way we might work with people when we're coaching and mentoring is looking at those ups and downs and maximising the learning from it. The worst thing you do is to kind of just get over it, think, right, back to normal. Whereas if we look at this as a kind of a learning loop and observing what's going on with us, seeing what's happening, challenging those operating norms, assumptions, beliefs that we hold, to see which ones will serve us, which ones actually are historical or irrelevant, and reconstructing ourselves, reinventing ourselves. That's a really good way to use what should be the energy of a crisis. Otherwise it is doom.